All right. Hey y'all, welcome back to Gathering Folds. So today's topic is how to fold without a crease pattern. So that's going to involve some reverse engineering. And I'm going to cover all of these tessellations and really break it down into how we can tell how hard something is going to be to reverse engineer, what we need to look for, and what we can expect when we're reverse engineering. So for some context, when I started out folding tessellations, I did my first one at a convention workshop, and then I watched some YouTube videos for my next several. Then I figured out how to put twists together, and from there it was off to the races, and I was reverse engineering everything in sight. I probably reverse engineered at least 100, maybe 200 tessellations before I started to put the pieces together more clearly in my head and design more of my own tessellations. So you can say I've gained some experience reverse engineering. And these days I teach my students, and a lot of these pieces that we'll be looking at are ones that I have taught to my students that are a good introductory level for folding, even if you're just starting out. So first up, when we have a tessellation that has all of its twists on one side, and we can tell that it has all of the twists on one side because we don't see anything that's not explained by the twists that we can see. So this particular tessellation is an alternating square weave, and I folded it live on last week's broadcast, so you can check that out there. But for today's purposes, what we want to look at is really the same factors that we were looking at last week with folding from crease patterns, which is positions, relationships, contents, and spacing. So by positions here, I'm saying, okay, how many different positions do I have? I've got this closed square position, and I've got this open square position. And if I take those two, I find those repeated all over the tessellation as a whole. There's nothing that breaks that pattern of closed square surrounded by open squares, open square surrounded by closed squares. And so I can see, okay, this is what's going on. I'm alternating between two different square twists. So that right there is positions and relationships. Square twists go together in a square tiling, and the relationship is alternating. So I'm going back and forth between the same two twists on a square tiling. And so then the contents, what specific squares am I going between? I'm going between a closed square and an open square. There's the contents. The spacing. How far apart are these twists? Well, the mountain folds that run between two twists just touch the mountain folds on the other side. And this is what I call a tube pleat, and it creates these nice weave structures on the back. So if all I had was a photo of this side, and I didn't have a photo of the side with the twists, I could do the same thing, because what you outline is what you get in a twist. So if I am outlining a single point, I get a single point on the back. That's characteristic of closed twists. If I am outlining an open shape, I get an open shape on the back that is the same as the one that I outlined. So this is an open square twist. And if I wanted to go even further, I could say, okay, this closed square is right-handed because the twist direction, the way that we can move around the twist without getting hung up, is the same on the front and the back. So then I can say, okay, this person started with a closed square twist in the center, and then they alternated the closed and open square twists at tube pleat spacing, and that's all that's going on here. and then I can continue out. But then you say, wait, what about the grid? So when you're starting out, when you're reverse engineering, start with a 24 or 32 fold or even 16 fold for getting a small repeating pattern. Start with a simple grid that you know how to fold and can fold consistently. So in this case, this is a 32 fold square grid folded aligned with the edges of the square. And fold it just aligned with, in the simplest form, aligned with the edges of the paper. Just keep the grid as simple as possible when you start reverse engineering. So this is the simple case. The next case up is a little bit more complex, but still has all the twists on the same side. So here, the important thing is being able to recognize that this is a hybrid square twist. It's halfway between an open square, so if you take the diagonal across the open square, that is this right triangle shape on top, and half of the closed square twist, just like the bottom half here. And so here we have this loop of 4 that is characteristic of the whole thing. Closed, hybrid, open, hybrid. And that loop of 4 can be copied over and over. Now, this whole thing is centered on a closed square, and so is centered in the middle of the loop. And partly that's because you can't actually center this tessellation on a grid intersection in any of these other rotationally symmetric positions. You can't center an open square on a grid intersection. You can't center a hybrid square on a grid intersection. You can't center the loop of 4 on a grid intersection because there is no grid intersection of the center of those places. So once I've identified what twists are there and how they're related, then I want to just get my grid out, put the thing that's easiest to put in the center in the middle, and go from there. And again, when I'm reverse engineering, I'm not trying to make an exact replica of what I see on the first try. So I could use less grid. I could use 16 or 24 fold instead of this grid, which looks to be 32 fold. I could start my center in a different position. But with the reverse engineering, we're really trying to understand the pattern first, and then maybe think about making display pieces later. So that brings us to the one that I'm going to fold for you today, which is my star weave pattern. And like the square knots weave here, it has an extended symmetry. So it's not doing the normal thing where we're alternating between one twist and another. It has a second kind of twist of the main kind of twist in the loop of 4. So in the square tiling, my characteristic loop of 4 was closed, hybrid, open, hybrid. In this star weave pattern, it's open hexagon, closed triangle, closed hexagon, closed triangle, and back to the open hexagon. And you'll see that loop of 4 in many places, but it's not the only loop. We also have closed hexagon, closed triangle, another closed hexagon, closed triangle. So there's these 2 loops to be looking out for. Again, this is convenient to reverse engineer because all the twists are on one side. Now we're going to move to the next category, which is things where twists are not all on the same side. So here we have an alternating twist pattern, just like we did with the alternating weave, but this time it's closed front, open back, instead of closed front, open front. I call this pattern square double bar wells. If you know another name or the designer, drop that information in the comments below. And this is one of the simple patterns that everyone needs to learn in order to fold more advanced tessellations. And there are ways to adapt this pattern to other geometries, which we'll get to in just a minute. So the key thing here is, just like with the square knots weave, I'm centering on a closed square because I cannot center on an open square. The open square is centered around a grid square, not a grid intersection. And so when I'm looking at this, again, I'm looking for the spacing. This has 2 spaces across, and this spacing here has 3 spacings from all the way up here to all the way under. So I'm creating these 2x3 rectangles. And here we have a rip in the paper. That's how my bone folder can pass through. And so with that in mind, I can recognize what's happening as I'm folding, place my next twist, and carry on from there. So this pattern of alternating a closed twist on one side with an open twist on the other can be extended into triangle grid as well, where we have a choice of either the hexagon as the closed twist on the front side and the triangle is open on the back, or vice versa, closed triangle in the front, open hexagon in the back, in which case I would still center the hexagon because the hexagon is still the highest point of symmetry in the tessellation. So again, we're looking at these spacings that create tubes. We have 2 spacings across on these bars, and so we're able to place our triangles on the back by saying, okay, when I place this triangle, I'm looking for it to make this 2 spaces across bar between my 2 valley folds. And when none of the other twists have been folded, this means that a pleat that extends out will be met by one with the twist being folded. So there's another example of an alternating tessellation where we've got twists on the front and the back. So then continuing on to a slightly harder structure, here we have right triangle twists. And so my advice, if you're trying to reverse engineer something, make sure you're familiar with each of the twists involved before you start working on reverse engineering. So in this case, the right triangle twist has 3 pleats that come into it. 2 of them have the same pleat depth, 1 of them is deeper, and the relationship is 1, 1, square root of 2, just like the relationship between the edges of the right triangle. In this tessellation, I can see that there are things going on that aren't happening because of the twist that we see on the front. And so I see this pleat coming out, but I know that the pleat from this triangle is going down. And so I can see that with these 2 tips of the triangle coming in and this 3rd pleat coming out, there is another right triangle twist on the back side in this location. So one of the interesting things here is this tessellation actually looks the same again on the back. This is what we call an isoarea tessellation. And so if you see the word isoarea, and that's spelled I-S-O-A-R-E-A, basically same area, same structure on the front and the back, then you really just need one side to tell you what both sides are doing. So then continuing on, another isoarea tessellation in right triangles. We've got some similar features where these 2 twists are interacting with 2 twists on the back to make a 2-fold rotational symmetry structure, or rotationally symmetric rather, and we saw those same structures in the previous tessellation. So one thing to try when you're reverse engineering is, instead of going for the whole thing right away, you can go for some smaller subset that will then give you information about the whole thing. So when I'm looking at this, I'm breaking it down into these clusters of 4. I'm saying, okay, this is a cluster of 4, this is a cluster of 4, this is a cluster of 4, this is a cluster of 4. And I can actually break the entire tessellation down into separate, distinct clusters of 4. And the same is true of this tessellation as well. So we've got cluster of 4, cluster of 4, cluster of 4, and on and on. And so then when we flip it over, we get the same kind of bow tie motif on both sides. And another thing that I have drawn on here is mirror symmetry lines. So I've got these mirror symmetry lines. So we're just analyzing the tessellation, trying to see what information it can give us. And so in this case in particular, this cluster of 4, this loop of 4 twists alternating front and back with twofold rotational symmetry in the middle, and by the way, a 2x2 box of grid squares in the middle, is the key to the whole tessellation, because once we have that, we can take our mirror symmetry lines on all 4 sides of it and mirror out to get the rest. So what we're really trying to do when we're reverse engineering is see, okay, what is the crucial piece of the tessellation? Pull that out, see if we can figure out how to get that going, and then we can get the rest of the tessellation from there. And often we'll need some small piece to figure out what is the key, and then on a bigger grid we can apply the key to great effect. So continuing, what if the structure is abnormal and there are bits on the front and the back? I believe this one is called dancing triangles, and here we have clusters of 4 equilateral triangles. So I've got some central triangle and some corner triangles, and in this case the central and corner triangles are different. In some cases they can even be on opposite sides of the paper. And this cluster is then repeated on the backside as well. So how do I know it's repeated on the backside, other than the fact that I designed and chose this for today? Didn't design it for today, but did choose it. So I can see, just like we were talking about with the square twists, that this is a closed triangle twist on the back. It has 3 pleats coming out from a single point, and that means it's a closed triangle. This is an open triangle twist on the back. It's outlining one grid triangle, just like we do for the open triangle twists that we can see on the side that we're on. And I can see that there's 3 of these closed triangles around the open triangle. So my next question then is, what spacing do I use? How do I find out the spacing? Well, what I've got here, and this is slightly harder to see with just a photograph, is there's a hexagon that's sitting here in the center, and this hexagon has 2 grid spacings per edge. Now, this is an actual literal hexagon in the crease pattern, but we're not looking at a crease pattern, we're reverse engineering. So how can I tell that? Well, when I see a closed triangle twist, I know that whatever is going under here goes 1 spacing further. And this is a matter of experience, but it's typical for pretty much all twists. Whenever you see something going under a pleat, it goes under the distance of the pleat depth, which in all of these tessellations is 1 grid spacing. So the other way I can tell is from my center, I can count out 1, 2 grid spacings to reach the corner of my triangle twist. All right. So now I can see exactly what I would have seen in the crease pattern, and I can get my tessellation rolling from there. The other thing you can do, though, is since you're reverse engineering, you're probably not going to go for a display piece the first time. So take advantage of that. Put a closed triangle twist in the center and see what happens when you space things out from there. So one of the things that I would do if I was trying to create a display piece from something that I saw a photo of is I would reverse engineer just a small snippet, like a 16-fold grid. If it's a triangle grid, I'd even do it on a square sheet of paper if that's what I have on hand. And then I would unfold that, draw the crease pattern on it, and if you have my crease pattern building blocks, then you can go in with the building blocks and see if you can put something together that would match the tessellation and work out, okay, what are the properties of this? Where would I want to center it? Where would I want to put this, that, and the other? How many grid spacings do I need? And then work from that diagram off of the reverse engineered small piece to then fold a display piece. So continuing, what if it's not clusters of 4, but instead clusters of 6? Well, likewise, we're going to need to start somewhere. We may as well start in as convenient a place as possible. The thing to recognize, and so most convenient place is center of a closed triangle twist. The thing to recognize on this tessellation is that it's not simply alternating. And how do I know it's not simply alternating? Well, if it was just alternating without any changes in spacing, then all 3 sides of each triangle would look the same. But here I have closed triangles coming right to the corners of this open triangle hole, and here I have a grid spacing before the next closed triangle. So that's telling me that there is something more going on here than simple alternation. And so I need to keep an eye out and see what this is. In this case, it's clusters of 6 triangles instead of alternation between 2 or clusters of 4 like we saw in the last tessellation. And so then I can reverse engineer from there. Now, one of the things with this particular tessellation is that there's only one point of 3-fold rotational symmetry. So our points of rotational symmetry are the center of the cluster, the loop outside of the cluster, like loop A outside of the cluster, and loop B outside of the cluster. 2 of these are centered on grid triangles. Now, how do I know that? Well, I can look from, I can try and look and see, is this point the same distance to each of my closed triangles around? No. But the center of this triangle is. I can go the same distance diagonally out from that position until I hit the next thing over. So when I want to reverse engineer this, I might want to start with this in the center instead of this grid triangle, but it doesn't matter that much. And actually this piece is folded on a grid that isn't centered on the grid triangle. If you do want to center your grid on a grid triangle, I do have a video up for that. Just go to the gathering, go to my channel, and you'll see it in there. It's one of my earlier live streams. But here we've got an extended symmetry with simple positions. We've got a closed triangle and an open triangle. We just need to remember to add the spacing between the clusters of 6. So next up, we're going to move on to things that are harder to reverse engineer. First up, we've got Sirens Call. So Sirens Call is one of my recent designs, and it's a tricky one. So we've got a bunch of twists going under other twists, and we've got extended symmetries. So these open triangles around the closed triangle are a cluster of 4. And so if I've got clusters of 4, I'm going to look to sort everything into these clusters of 4. So I've got open triangles around a closed triangle on this side. I see this open triangle hole. Now what could be around it? Well, there's actually 3 closed triangles. They don't look so closed because this open triangle has stolen some of the grid away that would be coming out of this closed point. So I've got another cluster of 4 of open center and closed outsides on the back. Okay. And then I'm looking for where did I center this? If I'm reverse engineering, I want to center it the easiest position possible, which is probably the center of this cluster, unless you've folded several of these cluster 4 triangle tiling tessellations, and then you know the easiest center for folding purposes is actually the center of the loop of 6, which in this case is in the center of a grid triangle. So what I would do with this one is reverse engineer something simpler first. I would say, okay, this is a really dense spacing, but if the clusters work together, then they'll also work together one spacing further apart. And so I would fold that first before attempting Sirens Call. And the back side, so we can verify, we've got these clusters of 4 open triangle center, closed triangle corners. And then it looks like I have another twist here. But if you look closely, all 3 edges are on grid lines. And this is simply an artifact of the open twists on the backside. So this isn't actually a series of twists that are all connected together. We are actually going from clusters of 4 on this side to clusters of 4 on the other side. Okay. So far we've been talking about tessellations that use simple twists with the exception of the hybrid square, but that one was visible. Then this one, propeller weave, has a secret inside of it. And that is that this place where 3 pleats are coming out of a triangle hole is not a closed triangle twist. So 3 pleats coming out of a single hole sure looks like a closed triangle twist, but then where is this pleat coming from? And not just on this side where it actually is going to a closed triangle, but where is it coming from over here? It's actually coming from the same position. Likewise, this pleat and this pleat. It looks half closed and half open, and that's because it is. It's actually a hybrid a hybrid hexagon twist. So it's half open, half closed hexagon. So we've got 2 pleats coming out of each corner of this twist. And I will be doing a tutorial on this one in the coming months. We've got a couple other topics to get through first. So something like this is a bit deceptive. If you see it from the front side, it looks like it's just closed triangle twists. If you see it from the back side, it looks like there's this weird on-grid triangle twist. So this is something where when you're reverse engineering, you want to be really careful about what exactly is going on, because things may not be as they seem. So then, continuing onwards, so this is getting into territory that would be pretty hard to reverse engineer if you don't know what's happening already. Continuing on, another category of things that are hard to reverse engineer are things that require a lot of pre-creasing. So often with pre-creased tessellations, you need to do all the pre-creasing before you can collapse, and it's extremely difficult to do the pre-creasing as you go. So this one is Distorta by Alessandra Babar, and it's one of those that really needs the pre-creasing on all of these rectangles before you can get your tessellation down. Now, you don't necessarily have to pre-crease the triangle twists, although it would certainly help. So in terms of reverse engineering, sure, you can put an open hexagon in the center, but where do you go from there? That's what makes this style of tessellation harder to reverse engineer, and also a lot of Alessandra's other tessellations where he's transitioning between triangle grid and square grid, where he's transitioning between these many-sided polygons and then triangles and squares and other things like that. Just like Distorta, this is It Is Wednesday by Arseny Coombe, and this one would be hard to reverse engineer also because it involves a lot of pre-creasing. And so if it involves a lot of pre-creasing and you don't pre-crease it, then you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to smush everything into place as you go. Now, even if you see the backside on this, it might not tell you exactly what does and does not need to be pre-creased. And there's actually a whole sequence of steps on how to fold this tessellation, including all the pre-creasing, in the Origami Olympiad booklet, which is how I got a hold of it. So when we have lots of pre-creases in a pattern, it's much harder to reverse engineer than something that's entirely twist-based. And then there's Sisyphus by, I believe, Peter Keller, also from Origami Olympiad, would also fall in that category of really hard to reverse engineer because there's hidden things going on, and also because of these isoarea closed hexagon twists that can make life difficult even for experienced folders. So once you flip over to the back, you can see that there's these pseudo hexagon twists in some locations. There's actual triangle and rhombus twists, and then hidden in here, there's a double depth hexagon twist. So that is not something that I would have expected just from looking at the front side. So this double depth hexagon is not obvious from here. When we look at this, we see closed hexagon, but we can't tell the pleat depth. Can't tell at all. And so when I'm looking at this tessellation, it becomes very unclear what is going on if I don't have the actual crease pattern. So that was a survey from easiest to hardest to reverse engineer. Now I'm going to demonstrate this in action with my star weave pattern. But first, a quick drink of water. So I've got a 32-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. This is a very standard triangle grid on a hexagon, nothing fancy. And I have my star weave tessellation. Now I could just be looking at a photo, so I'm just going to leave it flat and not poke at it, because often we don't have access to actual copies of the thing that we're reverse engineering. So first things first, I see, okay, how is this structured? It's hexagons with triangles around the hexagons, even though the hexagons themselves do change. There's always a hexagon on each pleat of each triangle and a triangle on each pleat of each hexagon. So I've got my positions, and then my relationships, I'm going from open hexagon to closed triangle, then I'm looping into a closed hexagon back to closed triangle and continuing around. For my spacing, these triangles around, sorry, I said I wouldn't poke. These triangles around the open hexagon have the mountain folds meeting each other. That's going to create a tube, so tube pleat spacing. And then my two triangles around the open hexagon are going to tell me exactly where to place my closed hexagon, which is in threefold rotational symmetry. You can see that because there's 3 close triangles and 3 far triangles around each of these closed hexagons. So that brings me to my paper, and I'll keep this tessellation here so we can see it as we go. And I'm going to start by folding an open hexagon twist in the center of the paper. And so what I'm doing here is I'm first making sure that my open hexagon is really going to be in the center of the paper by referencing my pleats to the corners. And the open hexagon has every pleat shifted 1 out from the center, so I can take the pleat 1 out from the corner of my paper and use that to set up my initial star puff shape. And then I can work from the center to add to that star puff once I'm confident that it is truly centered. And so with each of these pleats, see the one that I didn't do this, each of these pleats I'm emphasizing the valley as well as the mountain so that they don't kind of pop and break as I'm trying to get everything in and down. So squashing that open hexagon. Then I need the next triangle around that. I know I'm going to use tube pleat spacing so I can have this mountain of the triangle meet the mountain coming out from the hexagon. And I'll zoom in just a bit. And with the tube in place, the next thing I need to do is make sure that all 3 of my mountains are coming to a single point to make sure I get a closed triangle. And I'm going to go around in the direction that's going to make it easiest for me to see my spacing, my tube pleat, as I put in these triangles. There are other options. Nothing in twist-based tessellations is an absolute order. And so I could choose to continue around doing more triangles, or I can choose to resolve the pleat overlap and put in my closed hexagon, just like we have on our reference tessellation. So for putting in that closed hexagon, I want to make sure that my pleat overlap is opened up, and then my two mountain folds are pointing into the center. So that point where they intersect is the center of my closed hexagon, which I can then get my remaining pleats for. And you'll notice again that I'm emphasizing both the mountain and the valley of each pleat around my hexagon as I go, not just the mountains. And once I have my hexagon set up, I can go ahead and twist it into place. If there's any scrunching down in here, I can iron it out at this point. So with the closed hexagon twist, you really gotta just scrunch it in because it's not going to go smoothly. And then I see, okay, I don't have two pleat spacing over here. Does that match what is in my photo or other tessellation? And yes, there is a gap of one spacing between the pleat coming off the closed hexagon and the pleat coming off of this neighboring triangle. So that is good and expected. Continuing around, I'm going to do those same steps again. Put in a new triangle using the tube pleat spacing. Then open up my pleat overlap to set up my next hexagon. Again, this is a closed hexagon. All the 6 hexagons around the central hexagon are closed. And then I see if I just run my pleat out like normal and create a pleat overlap, that's going to be a bit of a mess. I know I need a closed triangle there anyways, so I may as well set it up now and just let it lay flat until I finish working on this hexagon twist. So secretly, this is also a lesson in how to fold hexagons and triangle 6-fold tiling tessellations. So then I can grab my next hexagon, scrunch it down, smooth it out, and then I really don't have a choice in where exactly this triangle twist ends up. The tessellation has already told me that it needs to be right here. But I can verify that it matches the triangle twist 2 triangles over on this hexagon, which we've said is 3-fold rotationally symmetric. So then, carrying on, we get to put in these 3 twists again over here. And so I'm putting in the triangle closest to the center first. In general, I work from the center out, so things closest to the center get done first. And then I'm putting in my next hexagon. As I do, I run into another 3-way intersection that I will lay down as just a 3-way intersection, and we'll turn it into a closed triangle twist later. So then I squash, gotta make sure all the valley folds are where they're supposed to be. I squash the hexagon, open up that triangle, squash it down, and I see there's the same relationship for both of these, and that's reassuring because it means that I'm being consistent in what I'm folding. So then I'll repeat again, getting my closed triangle in place, then my closed hexagon, which will point me towards another closed triangle. Setting up all of my pleats, both the mountain and the valley, making sure all of my valleys are in the right place before I scrunch around my closed hexagon and open that triangle twist back out. Or I suppose open it for the first time. And we get to repeat again. One of the great things about tessellations with hexagons, whatever you're doing, you do it 6 times. And squash the triangle, set up the hexagon. Here I've got a pleat overlap down here, but that's not going to bother me right now. And I will set up my 3-way intersection for the future triangle as I'm setting up the rest of the pleats on my closed hexagon twist, and scrunch that around. I can open out my closed triangle. And here I'm working closer to my full folding speed. And so you can see how I'm able to get 30 tessellations folded in 10 weeks. And then here I already have the closed triangle. So I've just got to remember that this is a closed hexagon, not an open hexagon. And here I'm setting up that 3-way intersection, same as before. And then on the opposite side, I'm setting up another 3-way intersection with the pleat that wants to cross. And that's because when I put this first outer hexagon, it didn't have the triangle with it. And then when I put in the next ones, they each had 1. So this one needs 2 to balance everything out. So I scrunch that around and then open the closed triangle twists. Okay, so then what to do from here? Well, I know that these closed triangles are 3-fold rotationally symmetric. That means that I'm going to have tube pleats here, here, and here, but not along here. Because I don't have a tube pleat here, I don't have a tube pleat here, so I can't have a tube pleat here. So what I cannot do is put a closed triangle twist here. That I'm not going to do. What I can do is put a closed triangle in here. So this matches with these two, And so I can go ahead and put that in. Now, what am I going to do next? I've got closed hexagon twist and 2 triangles that form a tube. And that's only the case when those 2 triangles are leading to an open hexagon. So from here, I can set this bit on the right to be a tube. I can pull up that hexagon puffy, and again, I'm going to want to put a triangle on the far side to help me balance everything out. And this is getting close to the edge, but we're still able to get a full closed hexagon twist. And then I can open out my closed triangle and repeat those 3 twists exactly again. So coming in here, I need to make a tube with this long pleat to the triangle coming from the hexagon. So another way to see it is we're going to make tubes with the long pleat, but not with the short pleat. So got our triangle, closed hex, 2 triangles, going to lead with a tube is going to lead to an open hexagon, which we can then put into place. And again, right on the edge, but we can get the whole thing in there. And then open that 3-way intersection to make the closed triangle. Continuing on out, we're going to repeat again, and we're going to get 3 more repeats after this. So I'll move a little bit quicker through these so we can get around to the end. And if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to drop that in the chat. I do have an eye on the chat box, so you are welcome to ask questions, and I'm happy to answer. So continuing, we're going to repeat those same 3 twists again. And by the way, if you're watching the replay, feel free to ask questions down in the comments. And if you want to ask a question but don't want everyone to see it, you can go to gatheringfolds.com and find the contact page. So once I've got the pattern established, it's much easier to then go on and fold the repeats. And you'll notice that I'm folding a ring around the center. And one of the things that's going on here is that there would be more twists in this ring if I had more grid to put them on. So this other tessellation that I've been working from was actually folded with more grid spacings. And so you can see the ring we're working on is with these outer open hexagons. And in that ring, we would also have another triangle, closed hexagon, and triangle. So we would have, so right now we're doing closed triangle, open hexagon, closed triangle. If we were going further, we would have another closed triangle, closed hexagon, closed triangle, feeding into everything else. And those are off the edges here. So one final round. And since everything was off the edges, we're going to just be able to finish out exactly the same as the previous 5, where we've got our closed triangle, then open hexagon, leading into a closed triangle. Whereas if we had more grid, then just like we saw with the inner ring that we did first, we would have an extra triangle on that last repeat around because it would have been missing from the first section of that loop. So there we have it. We can reverse engineer whatever tessellation we like, as long as we can identify the positions, relationships, contents, and spacing of the twists in the pattern. And if we are working from a twist-based tessellation, that's all we need. However, if we are working from tessellations that require a lot of pre-creasing or that require advanced knowledge of trickiness, then we would have a lot more work cut out for us and might want to get the crease pattern for those trickier tessellations. So if you fold the star weave pattern, let's flip over and see why I call it star weave, then I encourage you to tag me at Gathering Folds on Instagram or Facebook and show me what you folded. So that's all for today. Happy folding. And next week I will be out of office, but the week after I'm going to come back and talk about square twists and how to use them. So see you for the next one, and happy folding.